right, so we're going to get started this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Riley, and I am an Education and Outreach Associate with NAMEPA. Thank you so much for joining us today for our NAMEPA MARPOL webinar series on Annex V, the regulation for the prevention of pollution of garbage from ships. We're joined by two wonderful panelists today who will dive a little deeper into who they are and what they do. But first, before we get that started, I'm going to talk about NAMEPA. So here at NAMEPA, we are the North American Marine Environment Protection Association, and our mission is to preserve the marine environment by promoting a sustainable maritime industry through the best industry-led practices and educating the public on saving our seas. So we like to bridge that gap between the maritime industry and the public. We provide career education and career development. We provide K through higher education programs, and we like to educate both the public and the maritime industry on everything that's happening in our world in regards to the marine environment and how to protect it. Our first panelist that we have here with us this afternoon is Glenn Wiltshire from Port Everglades, who is the Deputy Port Director. So Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today. And do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Megan. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be invited today to participate in this important topic. A little bit about my background. I spent 30 years on active duty with the U.S. Coast Guard. Retired as the captain of the port in New York, and then for the last almost 17 years have been deputy port director here at Port Everglades. Now, I don't know how many people are familiar with Port Everglades. It is not where you go view alligators. A lot of people think, oh, Everglades, that's sawgrass, sawgrass, and that's one of our taglines of our county is from the seagrass to the sawgrass. But no, Port Everglades is the third largest cruise home port in the world. Also the third largest container port in the state of Florida, doing about 1.1 million TEUs. And then also our third line of business, and you can see our logo on the slide is our trident. So we have cruise, cargo, and then energy. Because 12 privately owned petroleum terminals here at the port, moving refined products, about 5.2 billion gallons per year, come in by ship and get distributed into the southern third of the state of Florida. So a little over a third of the entire transportation fuel supply for the state comes in through Florida. The other thing is we're a landlord port. So as we get into talking about Annex V, I'll go into more detail on what that means from a regulatory perspective. So that's who I am, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Glenn. And our next panelist that we have with us this afternoon is Alejandro Trillo, who is from Maritime Procurement Services, and he's the partner and CEO. So Alejandro, thanks so much for being here with us today. You want to talk about who you are and what your company does?
Sure. Thank you very much, Megan. Well, basically, we are the largest port reception facility for all the different annexes from MARPOL in Mexico. So we have been treating MARPOL waste for almost 20 years in Mexico. So we're very familiar with all the different treatments. And now the challenge and the opportunity is to measure the carbon footprint, because we learned that when you recycle and when you use circular economy models to recycle and account the recycling of the different waste streams, we can contribute to fight climate change. So I would like to talk about that because there is a lot of opportunity there. I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So we're going to dive right into our first question, and I'm going to ask Glenn first. So what are some of the waste streams that are included with Annex V, and how does this annex differ from what substances can be discharged into the ocean?
So good question. So Annex V, as the title says, is garbage. But if you look at the waste streams on a ship, typically the aspect of garbage that's regulated really is food waste If you look at, the overall applicability, it's food waste, it's cargo residues, animal carcasses, because, not an issue here in the United States, but in other places of the world, and cleaning agents, that are used to, vessels after they discharge their cargo and are in transit to their next thing. So those are the, that's the main framework. Now, as you sort of drill down into Annex V, there are various prohibitions and distances offshore that certain things that can be discharged. Oh, the biggest one I forgot when you talk about garbage, what elements of garbage? Plastics. Plastics, is, as you read more and more about the challenge of plastics, and there's a number of international initiatives looking at, how do we modify our use of plastics because they're persistent in the environment. And that's one of the reasons why MARPOL Annex V prohibits the discharge of plastics and a number of other substances anywhere in the oceans as you get in certain areas. But that's basically, what is covered by the scope of Annex V.
Wonderful. Alejandro, do you have anything to add?
Yes, well, Glenn is right. One of the most largest problems in the industry is plastics, and according to the IMO, the maritime industry produces 5.5 million tons of waste, solid waste, per year. This equals to filling one Miami Dolphin stadium per week of waste up to the top. So only 10% of the maritime waste is being recycled. And this is very important because there is a lot of opportunity. I'm talking worldwide. You have different increasing recycling rates in countries like in the US. But overall, only 10% of this waste is being recycled. So we're talking also about operational waste that you can find in the engine rooms, oily racks and such. Plastics, aluminum cans, broken glass from the cruise ships, which is a very common waste stream, cardboard. But yeah, there is a lot of opportunity here to recycle and treat the different waste streams better.
Wonderful. And Alejandro, why is this annex such a vital regulation in MARPOL?
Well, it is very important because many people think that it is not a big problem, especially for cargo ships. You're talking only about maybe 15 crew members in a cargo ship to 70, 20 maybe, and they don't produce a lot of MARPOL Annex V. But when you see the maritime world every day, we have more than 70,000 ships around the world. So when you add this up, it is a lot of waste. So that is why it is very important to regulate MARPOL Annex V.
And Glenn, as a port, how do you see this annex being so vital to the regulations in MARPOL?
Well, putting garbage into the sea, even some of the authorized things. So, for example, one thing I didn't mention, dunnage, which is the materials that is used, primarily wood for cargo. And well, packing the cargo. There, MARPOL Annex V does authorize that to be sent over the side in certain areas offshore, far offshore. But that, some of that creates a safety hazard. But the other thing is, from a port's perspective, and we have a port tariff that prohibits the discharge of any garbage, obviously, into our waters. But as much if the garbage does come ashore, it has to be handled in accordance with the requirements of Annex V, which is implemented through some U.S. Coast Guard regulations. So, but plastics, another one. I'm sure everyone has seen a photograph somewhere of a, whether it's a bird or a seal or something that, put their head in through, one of those plastic 6-pack things, and it's around their neck, and it doesn't affect them in the near term, but as they mature and grow, well, the plastic doesn't stretch, and it actually, can strangle them. Same thing with fishing nets. Fishing gear is also covered by Annex V, and there's been many documented instances of fishing gear that's discarded, and it doesn't sink to the bottom, and it creates a hazard, to the ocean environment. And that's ultimately, putting garbage anywhere is not a good thing, and that's what Annex V is intended to do, is to minimize that, the discharge, not eliminate it. I teach boating safety classes to recreational boaters, and our message is, if you take it out, bring it back. And that's really what the commercial. Now, to give you an idea for our port, last year we had 3,900 ship calls. So that's the volume of ships coming in, a mix between cruise ships. And I think, as Alejandro said, the cargo ships themselves don't generate a significant volume of waste that they discharge here, probably because they can discharge it somewhere else and not be subject to the same requirements. Whereas a cruise ship, on the other hand, being the world's third largest cruise ship home port, and last year, I'm just looking at my statistics, make sure I get this right, we had almost 700 calls of cruise ships, and a lot of garbage comes off each of those ships as they make that turn to come back. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes. And Alejandro, you had talked about climate change, but how does that garbage affect the ocean? I know Glenn touched on it a little bit, but do you have anything to add on what that garbage effect is?
Well, it is a very big effect, especially because the whole maritime industry produces this astonishing 5.5 million tons per year. So if you recycle most of these waste streams, and Florida ports are a good example of how to do things well. You have, I know very well the people from waste management. They handle the waste from Miami and also Port Everglades, and they recycle most of the waste streams. And when you are recycling these waste streams, you avoid using virgin raw materials to make products. So this turns into a very positive effect, because you are contributing to avoiding using these raw materials, virgin raw materials, by using waste to produce new products. So with this effect, you're contributing to avoid emissions. So this makes a lot of difference, and these best practices are very good. Instead of sending the waste to the landfill, where you see these practices in many ports in the world. So.
Thank you. And the responsibility for Annex V doesn't solely fall on the ships, but Glenn, what does a port reception facility look like, and what is required to receive materials that are listed in Annex V?
Okay, now good question, Megan. And there's Coast Guard regulations in 33 CFR Part 158 that require certificates of adequacy for any ports that handle ships over a certain size. So we as a port have a certificate of adequacy ourselves, but all the cruise lines, for example, that call here. But what's it look like here? We don't have a reception facility on the port itself. So what you would see if you came in on a cruise ship in the morning after a cruise, you would see a dock lined with dumpsters. And those dumpsters are there to collect different waste streams. So as Alejandro said, the things that that can be recycled, the cardboards, the things like that, aluminums, those are referred to as unregulated waste. Unregulated in the sense that they can be handled through the normal waste stream, and we do encourage recycling here at Port Everglades. We've talked about, is there a way to create an incentive? But since we don't charge them to take the garbage off, there's no incentive that we could create. Some ports actually, if there's a charge, you can reduce that unit charge to create an incentive to act in a different manner than what's probably the least expensive, which, as Alejandro said, you take it to a landfill and you're paying by the ton. But the other aspect is the regulated waste, and regulated waste is that's overseen by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and those those dumpsters, which regulated waste is basically anything that has food product, either food products or contaminated material that has been contaminated. So we're talking about fruits, vegetables, meats, fish, anything like that, and that has to go to a USDA regulated facility. And we have in our certificate of adequacy, we've identified there's pretty much only one facility here in South Florida that all of the cruise lines use. Stericycle is the name of it, and they're subject to USDA regulations of how their facility is going to operate. So as a port, that's what we're monitoring. As I say, we have a tariff that says, follow all rules and regulations, federal, state, or local, and we specifically say, put your garbage in, the authorized receptacle, which means the regulated waste goes into one waste stream, and the unregulated waste goes in other waste stream. But it all gets taken off the port. Some ports do have a reception facility where they actually gather that waste and marshal it in a port facility. Some ports even have incinerators. Port Everglades had an incinerator probably 40 years ago, I think, but not now. All that waste stream leaves the port and goes somewhere else.
Wonderful. Alejandro, do you have anything to add with how the reception facility is with maritime procurement services?
Yeah, sure. We basically do the same as in Florida. So we come and collect all the waste streams from trucks, and we take these trucks to our facilities very close to the ports, where we segregate the different recycled materials and then send them to the different recycling facilities. For instance, the broken glass from beers, we send them to Grupo Modelo, the company owner of Corona. So they make Corona beers again. And by the way, Carnival Cruise Lines is the company that untaps more Corona beers in the world per day. So we have a lot of glass coming from cruise ships. It is amazing the amount of glass that you can take. So we take the different waste streams, we treat them outside the ports because as Glenn mentioned, the landing in the ports is very precious. So, and it is very limited, the land in the ports. So it makes sense in most ports in the world to take the waste outside of the ports to these dedicated facilities. And these facilities usually take care also of the city waste. So it makes more sense to send them to these sort of facilities. And talking about the incentives, a very good example is Europe, where they charge a fee. So all the different ships that come to these ports have to land the waste because they are already being charged a fee. So this is one of the most practical incentives that I have seen out there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, Glenn, I know you had talked about some of the regulations and who enforces, but are those regulations, do you think they're strong enough? Do we need more regulations, and how are they enforced?
Well, here in the United States and here at Port Everglades, the enforcement is primarily the U.S. Coast Guard. As I said, we have a certificate of adequacy to serve as a reception facility, and it also covers us for Annex I for the oil. But there again, we don't handle and operate a facility ourselves. But so it's the U.S. Coast Guard who is primarily when they do our annual facility inspection, they're checking that we have the right documentation. As I say, our tariff addresses the requirements for our port users, and then they, as they're doing their vessel inspections, it's for the petroleum ships that come into port. 90% of those are U.S. flags, so they're subject to U.S. regulation, which is separate from the Annex V requirements. But even the foreign flag vessels that call in the U.S., they're required to comply, and they do checks. I don't know if we're going to get into the specifics of what's required as far as garbage management plans, but when they do those port state control exams for the foreign flag vessels, that's one of the things that they're checking for, and depending on what they find, that's what they do it. So from our perspective, we think the system is working the way it's supposed to. I just did want to mention, because Alejandro was talking about the program in Mexico, and I was just on a cruise, and we stopped in Cozumel, and there was a lot of hubbub about a cruise ship, some garbage from a cruise ship that found its way into a disposal location where it wasn't supposed to go, and that's happened, and that's where it's a regulatory framework and a network. It's not just one signal agency. As I said, USDA is the one who's out verifying that regulated waste facility is meeting all of their requirements, thus they can maintain their certificate that they need to be allowed to accept waste.
Alejandro, do you have anything to add about the regulations and what you see and what's being enforced?
Yeah, sure, Megan. And I would like to address this case from Cozumel. It was a local company, a small local company that offloaded the waste, and the problem was that they were disposing the waste in the landfill in Cozumel. So even though that's legal, because it is according to the law a proper disposal, the community was not happy, because they say that Cozumel is a very small island and the land is very limited. So they only have capacity to deal with the local waste and not bring in waste from cruise ships into the island. So this is very important. We actually we have a project in Cozumel to make waste to energy. So the idea is to bring the different waste streams that cannot be recycled into Cozumel in order to make energy. So this is a whole different view and approach, because we will produce energy for the local community with the waste from the cruise ship. So it makes a lot of difference. And apart from the regulations, I think that we have to also to address and use the best practices out there. There was a case also in Long Beach where they were sending the mattresses from cruise ships to the landfill. So that is another example. Even though it's legal, if you can use recycling options, it's much better. So I think that apart from the regulations, we have to look out there for the best practices in order to address the waste management.
Very good. Glenn, so under Annex V, there are something called special areas. Can you talk about what those special areas are?
Sure. There's a number of special areas around the world. I think there's 8 specific designated, but they're mostly confined water bodies. Now, when I say confined water bodies, the Mediterranean Sea is a confined water body, but most people won't think of it as that. The Baltic, the Black Sea, the Red Sea, the Gulf in the Middle East, North Sea, and then the wider Caribbean region is designated special area. And what does that mean? What it means is that, for example, food waste can be discharged over 12 miles offshore if it's not commuted, which means it hasn't gone through a grinder. But in a special area, it's prohibited, so you cannot do that. And the same thing on even commuted or grinded food waste. You have to be farther offshore, 12 miles offshore, as opposed to 3 miles. So that's really what it means, is that IMO, as they've gone through the process of Annex V, and Annex V has been amended many times since it first went into effect into 1988, if I remember correctly. So as we learn more, obviously plastics are prohibited. They've always been prohibited, I think, from the beginning. But so that's really what a special area is, because of the nature of the environment. There's an additional level of regulation or under Annex V than there is in other areas.
Wonderful. Thank you. Alejandro, do you have anything to add?
Yes, well, about the special areas related to Annex V, many cruise ships have been facing a problem when using incinerators on board, because you are not able to incinerate in certain special areas. So they don't comply with regulations, and the Gulf of Mexico is one of those special areas. So what we have seen is that cruise ships generate more waste because they're not able to use their incinerators in special areas. So as Glenn said, the regulation is evolving all the time, and we have to adapt as ports and as port reception facilities in order to deliver the services that the industry requires.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Alejandro, can you talk about what a garbage management plan is, and why do ships need to have that?
Sure, Megan. Well, the garbage management plan is basically the guideline to manage all the waste streams on board, and it is very important. So the crew uses these guidelines in order to segregate the different waste streams and to dispose the different waste streams in a proper manner, and also to keep a record book in order to make sure and to prove that they are actually doing the right thing with the different waste streams that they are being produced on board. So when they arrive, for instance, in the U.S., the Coast Guard asks for the record book, and they see if it matches, and if they have the different MARPOL reception certificates that prove that the waste has been well managed.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Glenn, how does it help with in the port having these garbage management plans as well as on board? How does it streamline the process?
Well, I think, as Alejandro said, if the waste stream is managed aboard the vessel before it arrives, it's much more efficient. And as I said, there may be a dozen dumpsters lined up, and they're for different waste streams. Now, the least efficient way is to take it off and then do that sorting on the land side. And there are some locations in the world that's what exactly happens. It all comes off, and then it goes to an off port facility to be sorted out. I'm not aware of that occurring in the U.S. anywhere, but there's other places that would do that. But time is money when it comes to a ship. But as I say, a ship doesn't make any money sitting still. So and when they're in port, if it's a cruise ship, they're loading offloading pastures, loading pastures, loading a few 100 tons of food and everything else that they can turn into waste when they come back. So if you have an inefficiency in that process, that's going to result in a longer period of time in port. I did want to make one other comment, and when Alejandro was talking about waste to energy, because Broward County, we're a county of about 2 million people, and our county commission, we're the Port Everglades, I should have mentioned, is a government agency. We're a department in Broward County government. So, there's been a lot of focus on waste to energy plants. It does no good to fill up a landfill, because the landfill will fill up, and then space becomes more valuable. So we have one large landfill here in the county that it goes higher and gets wider. But now the county has come and said, nope, you're limited. So the county is actually creating a new solid waste authority to manage the wastes, not just off of ships, but for the entire county, and really focus on that waste to energy. Just like cruise lines have done a great job in looking at their waste streams, because they want to recycle as much as they can for a whole bunch of reasons.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, I'm going to put this to both of you, and whoever wants to answer first is more than welcome to. But MARPOL 5, or MARPOL Annex 5, is mandatory for ships trading within the U.S., but not globally. Why do you think this annex is optional? Should it be optional? And how would enforcing this annex globally look like?
Alejandro, you want to take that
Yeah,
first?
yeah, sure. Well, actually, MARPOL Annex 5 is mandatory for all the countries that have signed the MARPOL Convention. And I believe that until now we have around 170 or 180 countries. So it is basically mandatory in most of the regions in the world. And if you want to trade with either the US or Europe, you have to comply. So I think that compliance is out there, and the biggest problem, I believe, is the compliance from different port reception facilities in most of the countries. Because if a country is authorizing a port facility, but that country or that facility doesn't comply with normal standards, that is a problem, because the ship is going to offload this waste into this port that is being authorized by local authorities, but this won't comply with the company regulation or the usual standards that we use, for instance, in the US or Mexico. We have basically in the US and Mexico the same standards because of the free trade agreement that we had for a very long time. So basically we have the same regulations. But if you go to Central America or South America or even the Caribbean, you will offload the waste, and maybe the waste is going to end up in a place that you don't want that waste to end up. So I think that's why you have to look and use the technology out there, digitalization, and also we're proposing a global traceability platform in order to see where the waste is sending, and to make sure, and that the companies make sure that most of the waste is being recycled, no matter where they offload it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Glenn, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Alejandro got it right. It is true that it is an optional annex, and that's just the nature of the IMO process. The ability to, like any IMO initiative, MARPOL being a good example. It takes many years to get put in place. It needs ratification by a certain number of countries or a certain tonnage, depending on how it's set up, to even go into effect. And then as countries sign on, it essentially is mandatory for those countries. And I didn't look at the list of countries that have signed on to Annex 5, but it is, as Alejandro said, it's the last number I saw was 150, but that's still a lot of countries. It's not like the major ship operating countries in the world have not signed on. So if you did a statistical analysis, my guess is an extremely high percentage of the locations where ships would call need to comply. But there are, as Alejandro said, those who have not signed on for whatever the reason. What you hope from looking at it from a holistic standpoint they don't become locations where ships gravitate to try to save money, because their waste management practices are not the same as other places. And it's your third raise the bar, and that's really the intent of Annex 5 and really all of the annexes in MARPOL, is to raise the bar internationally and have a level playing field.
Yes. Now, we have seen a lot of different things come out with regards to different kinds of plastics, alternative materials. Have you seen a change or a shift in what's being distributed off garbage-wise, off ports, off ships?
I'll just start that. I think the biggest thing that we've seen is, and cruise lines. Cruise lines are obviously looking at ways. So, now you get a can of water rather than a bottle of water. So that, that's part of their initiative to reduce the plastics, generation of plastics. But, and then I think shipping companies, all, across the board are becoming more and more responsible and understanding that, they've got to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, as a catchy phrase from way back when. But so we've been seeing things like that.
And Alejandro, have you seen any differences in materials?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think that the biggest example is plastics. So all the companies are trying to reduce plastics and also to increase recycling rates. So we're seeing more materials that can be recyclable, and they're eliminating single-use plastics, for instance, very much. So I think that the industry is evolving, and it is a good thing.
Wonderful. And with that evolution, what can be done to better educate seafarers on the importance of this annex in MARPOL and as a whole? I'll pass it to Alejandro first, and then Glenn, you can add on.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. So I think that education is very important in training, because especially in cargo ships, in the merchant industry, because the cruise industry takes this very seriously. All the cruise ships have an environmental officer on board. So this person has the same rank as a chief engineer, and his job is to make sure that all the waste streams are being segregated, recycling, increase recycling rates. And I think that we have to move this best practice into all other ships, tankers, container ships, and training is crucial to do this.
And Glenn, what do you think can be better done to educate the seafarers on the importance of this annex?
No, and that's good, as Alejandro said. And then the question becomes, how do you get that message out there? I also I am on the board of directors of the Seafarers House here at Port Everglades, and we took advantage. Well, I don't. That's the wrong term, but during the pandemic and the slowdown, we made a decision to build a new Seafarers Center, which is going to open here within the next month or so. And one of the things that we have talked about as a board is, as the seafarers come ashore, and it's a place to sort of have a little respite and chapel and all those other things. But think about educational training out and training opportunities. So something simple, which I'm going to take to our board meeting, which we have in a couple of weeks, is educational pamphlets that are available to the crew members that talk about the importance of whether it's Annex V or any of the annexes, and then we have a training room that we built into the facility. It's difficult for training seafarers because they're in port for a very short period of time, and if it's a cargo ship, they may not even have enough time to get off the ship, because they're also involved in the cargo operations. Whereas a cruise ship, a percentage of the crew can get ashore for a few hours every port call, and it's an opportunity to provide some of that education. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity. And so if NAMEPA has any pamphlets or other information that they think is focused on the seafarers, please get it to us. And then, our Seafarers House is part of a national network of seafarer support organizations. So there may be an opportunity there through NAMA, which is the national organization of marine ministry, to use that vehicle to get that word out about the importance.
Yeah, we work closely
things.
with NAMA, and we would be happy to send you some materials.
Well, thank you.
Well, that is all the questions that I have for our panelists. Is there anything that our participants have that they'd like to ask? If not, then I'm going to just share my screen and we'll talk about our upcoming next webinars that we have. So our next NAMEPA MARPOL webinar will be on July 9th on Annex 6, and then we have some for the rest of the year as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. If you would like, you can take our Operation Compliance for Tools for Effective Environmental Compliance, which is an overall MARPOL compliance. And if you take this, we'll send you a certificate via email, and that just shows that your willingness to protect the marine environment. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you,
Well,
Megan.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Megan, and thanks for everyone who hung in there and participated today. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.